Thank you, Pam, and thank you, everybody, for coming on this rainy day. It is a distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Atkinson, American Diabetes Association Eminent Scholar and Jeffrey Keene Family Professor in the Department of Pathology, Immunology, Laboratory Medicine, and also in pediatrics at the University of Florida. Dr. Atkinson earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan, but then magic happened and he came here to get his PhD, did a postdoctoral fellowship here, and then joined the faculty, rising rapidly through the ranks of assistant, associate, and full professor. His early studies of pancreatic islet cell autoantibodies revealed critical immune mechanisms in type 1 diabetes, and his landmark longitudinal research on thousands of at-risk children helped define who would and who would not develop the disease. To advance human research resources, he conceived and drove the creation of the Network for Pancreatic Organ Donors with Diabetes, or NPOD, a global initiative supported by the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation and the Helmsley Charitable Trust. NPOD has provided unprecedented access to human pancreatic tissue, enabling discoveries that would not be possible in animal models or in just direct laboratory studies. Over his career, Dr. Atkinson has published more than 650 papers and earned many, many honors, including the Mary Tyler Moore and S. Robert Levine Award for Excellence in Research on Type 1 Diabetes, an award he has uniquely received 3 times. He also co-founded the Diabetes Disaster Response Coalition, ensuring access to essential medications, supplies, and I think even some clinical expertise to patients with diabetes who have gone through a disaster like a hurricane or the floods recently. So please join me in welcoming a world leader in type 1 diabetes research and a tireless advocate for patients and families, Dr. Mark Atkinson.
Right, Ken, thanks for that warm introduction. And put it best, you're the only person that ever says I'm not a loudmouth. Okay, all right. Can you hear? All right, good. So it is an honor to be back again. I was just sharing that this is actually my 3rd time here. First time was over a decade ago, where I spoke on what we eat and how it influences our health. And then just before COVID, I was here to talk about diabetes and its changes. Those talks were easy in a way, in that I was just able to take talks that I give all the time and then modify them to the audience. This was a new one on me. But it was something that, again, back in late spring, early summer, Ken reached out and said, would I talk about it? Because we're hearing so much about it. So today, new talk. I'd love to hear all the questions from you. We're going to talk about what you've been hearing about NIH and grants, and bringing you up to speed on that, why you should care, and talking about what this means for the future. So again, let's walk through this together. Now, I do want to give some warnings here. I will be maybe a little sarcastic at times in terms of some of the changes. And as hard as I did to try, and I shared this deck with some colleagues over the weekend, and they said, this is wise. I'm going to try and avoid, as the best I can, politics in this talk. But at the end of the day, it's a challenge, and I don't mean to offend anybody. And again, at the end of the day, this is not a political issue, although it's been made out to be. So just a little warning, I respect all in here. So who am I and why am I probably here today? And this was briefly mentioned by Ken. I actually hit my 41st year at the University of Florida this last August. That's a picture of me, a little more hair in my head, my wife, Carol, when we arrived here. I've had a lot of experience with the NIH in terms of funding and publications, peer review of what we do and why we do it. And that's why I mention it here. But again, the major reason why I think I'm here is because Ken Rand asked, and you can't say no to Ken Rand. So there you go. So that's why I'm here. And I do have experience with the topic. Now, this is something I want to begin with a quiz and audience participation here. Where do you think that the world's leading scientific institutions are in terms of a country in 2025? Does somebody want to shout on an answer? I hear one for China. Any others? I wish it were US, but the first answer was right. There's this effort called the Nature Index, and many people might be familiar with Nature as being probably the leading scientific journal in the world. And every year, a few years ago, they started keeping track of where the publications come from in science and medicine and in their impact in terms of how many times they were cited and how they are changing the world. And what you can see here is actually 8 of the top 10 universities, and this was just put out in August, I believe, are now from China. We have one from the US, Harvard University at number 2, and then a German one, Max Planck, at number 10. This didn't used to be this way. It's changing over time. And it is cause for concern. And at the end of the lecture, we can talk about the impact of this. And getting back to the theme of this talk, it is about the National Institutes of Health. Most of the time during this call, the remainder of the lecture, I'm going to refer to it as NIH. It actually originated back in 1887 as a one-room laboratory of hygiene. So Ken, you should be interested in this. And it was actually on Staten Island in New York. In 1930, it actually expanded to become the NIH. Today, it remains the largest public funder of biomedical research, although the asterisk is there, is that it's thought within a couple of years from now, China will take over the lead of this. They already are advanced towards the US in terms of some areas like engineering. They spend more than the US, but currently the NIH comprises about 27 institutes and centers, largely focused around what area of disease they work with. Its mission is to provide for knowledge gains on living systems, apply that knowledge to improving all of our health, and then it supports and conducts medical research both domestically and globally. So NIH serves a very important role in the past and in the future. We believe it will. And if you just take a look, and this is like a consensus list, if you would, of advances in human health since the inception of the NIH that can large part be related to NIH funding. And they range from, again, understanding how molecular biology works, the DNA to RNA, and if you heard, I'll just pick out a few here. Advances in newborn screening, if you had grandkids or kids and they get the heel prick, and then using that to identify inborn errors of metabolism and the like, neonatal screening programs, childhood vaccines. I know a lot of controversy recently around this, but they can be tied to NIH. Heart attack treatments, enzyme replacement therapies, people with hemophilia or clotting deficiencies or other enzymes, all of the whole HIV areas, statins, if you're on cholesterol-related drug, you can relate it back to that. And then things in the future from stem cells, cellular regeneration, and then even gene editing. All of these for the future can be tied back in many ways to NIH funding. My own area of research and what I've spent most of the last 40 years on is in the area of type 1 diabetes. Some of these applications go for type 2 disease. 100 years ago, this predated NIH, again, before the advent of insulin therapy. If you had insulin requiring diabetes, what we now call type 1, it was a terminal illness. You would live 6 months, maybe 5 years, but then you would succumb to not having insulin. And then thanks to some work from some Canadians, Banting and Best, we now have a century plus of insulin therapy. And then advances that have come through from the way we measure a person's blood glucose. We've gone from rudimentary ways of measuring it in urine to now where you'll often see people that wear patches on their arm, because between the patches on the arm and your iPhone or Android phone, you can instantly tell your blood glucose without fingerprinting. And we have all sorts of new devices for insulin delivery, pumps that you can wear, and there's a whole future there. A lot of this only resulted because of NIH clinical trials or trials into research. So we've had a dramatic change, and it's leading to improvements in care. But I'll give you an example of somebody, and this is a friend of mine that I met down in Orlando that was diagnosed with type 1 a long time ago. And just about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, she's going to share what research has meant to her.
Hi, I'm Brenda Martinez. I'm 74 years old, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1957. I was 6 years old. Mom was given a strict diet for me to follow and instructions on how to administer insulin. Mom gave me 1 shot per day. Once the insulin was in my body, I had to eat, regardless of appetite. We found out quickly that I had to eat on time for all meals or suffer the results of low blood sugar. To help the doctor determine the insulin dose and the efficacy of the regimen, we logged and reported to him the results of urine tests done 4 times a day. When I was about 11, I began to take my own shots and carry candy for raising my blood sugar quickly. I followed this regimen for at least 16 years. The next game changer was the home blood glucose monitor. What this meant was that for the first time, I could see my blood sugar level in real time. I pricked my finger 4 times a day, and I could adjust my insulin or diet according to those results. 1996 brought 2 wonderful changes: rapid-acting insulin and an insulin pump. Rapid-acting insulin began working much more quickly than the older insulins did. The insulin pump freed me from the tyranny of having to eat food to match my insulin. Now I could take insulin to match what I ate when I chose to eat. Continuous glucose monitors have been the biggest game changer yet. I'm not limited to checking just 4 times a day. Now I could always know what my blood sugar is. I taught elementary children for 30 years, and in my last year, I had 3 students with diabetes. We had a special understanding, almost an exclusive club, because we got it. Encouraging them with the knowledge that real scientists are working not only toward finding a cure, but on ways to make our lives with diabetes easier in the meantime, is invaluable.
So Brenda is, sometimes the patient's perspective is the best to give, and Brenda just shared, with having disease over 50 years, how much research is meant to her. So why else is supported research important? Well, a lot of people, if you have an economics background or follow things, there's this category called return on investment. And at the most rudimentary level, for every $1 spent on NIH funding, the thought is that you get about $2.56 or a little over $2.50 of new economic impact. So it's not a waste in money. How about here in Florida? Is it a good thing? Well, actually, the answer is yes, in that I was able to find that there's almost 3,000 firms in Florida in the biotechnology area and pharmaceutical industry that have ties back to research. And if you look at them, I mean, we rank very high. Number 2 in medical device manufacturing, number 2 in pharmaceutical manufacturing, and number 4 in biotech R&D within the United States. And then in terms of healthcare providers, all of the physicians and healthcare team that we see, we have the 3rd highest number in the country. So again, it's very NIH funding and research funding is important nationally. and in the state of Florida, and it's important in terms of its advances. Now let's pivot a little bit to talk about this notion of peer review and why it has been important and why a lot of people in my community or in my shoes have been concerned. Well, peer review came into the NIH, again, just after World War II in terms of forming groups or panels, if you would, of called study sections, where outside experts would review the quality of a scientific proposal. And by 1950, it was such a successful program that this just integrated into everything at NIH and was conducted through what's called the Research Grants Office. In the 1970s, 1980s, you remember the infamous war on cancer that was declared. Again, they had expanded these review panels to be more and more disease specific. And then in the more recent years, last 25 years, they've been under constant review under NIH directive with public input on how to, and scientific input on how to improve the system. But peer review has for a long time been an important component of NIH, and for these main reasons. Number one, it was based on science. It's historically been based on scientific merit rather than who you are, what you believe in politically, or institutional influence, like kind of University of Florida or Harvard University drive things. It's been largely, if not exclusively, based on the merit of the idea. Expert evaluation, meaning the people that evaluate these programs are independent and experts in the field. It does promote a fair competition amongst applicants, and it helps NIH guide programs toward the areas of most need. And so that's been the benefits of the system in the past. One of the things Ken asked me to do was was to explain how a grant works, because maybe people don't understand. So it takes time. You don't just write an email or send a letter to NIH and say, hey, I want funding, and then your institution receives a check. Typically, it takes an individual with an idea about 3 to 12 months worth of work in the lab and at a computer to develop a concept, a grant, if you would, to submit to the NIH. And then once it gets to the NIH, it goes through a process that takes, on average, about 9 months to get through the system to where the individual applicant will receive feedback. And there's reasons for this. I'm not saying it's an inefficient system, and NIH is working on ways to trim a few months off. It's just a system that, due to its thoroughness, it does take time. And then oftentimes, the study section, once they review a grant, will come back and say, we like your idea, but you need to make some modifications, because these are, again, experts. So it actually can take 18 to 20 months of effort, which is a great expenditure of time to get your grant if you are able to get it. So it takes a lot of work and persistence on the applicant to do this. But again, if you look prior to 2017, the system of peer review was traditionally insulated from politics. There were these criteria on which grant applications were judged: significance, innovation, approach, environment, and then the investigators themselves. And then the funding decisions were largely based on a scoring system, sort of a grade, if you would, and then the aforementioned NIH level of priorities. So was the process perfect? No. But at the same time, it was subject to a number of improvements. Well, unfortunately, again, in 2017, some things started to be changed in the system. And I'll show some graphs in a few moments talking about funding. And one of the first things was that the budget that was presented in 2017 called for dramatic cuts in NIH budget funding. Now, the good news was that through negotiations with Congress, they were largely restored, and that didn't occur. But some new things that were brought into the vernacular, if you would, or the evaluation of drugs grants that were not historically put in there. One was this notion of a priority for Americans. And I'm not making value judgments here. I'm just sharing, like I did in the warning sign, the truth. American research, there was a greater scrutiny of studies that were performed on foreign soil, say things like HIV/AIDS in Africa, in other areas. A lot of effort to reinstill the bans on use of fetal tissues that actually went back to the early 2000s. And then because of when a grant was evaluated, a lot of these grants ended up being canceled because of their content. And that again was a change of what had historically been done. Now, with the going back just within this past year, we've seen, in addition to those things, a series of greater compliance in terms of foreign affiliations, disclosure requirements, some of this due to well-publicized areas about COVID and research that was done in China around COVID, but it goes far beyond the COVID example. Then there's been a lot of anxiety on researchers, all researchers funded by NIH, about losing funding because of even as little as a word that you would use in a grant, a single word. And then there's been a lot of heightened review on grant applications that are around areas that may be, for a variety of reasons, just untimely. And then again, I've tried to put in here some newsprints that show examples of that. So for example, and then with RK Jr. coming in, again, it's brought in, and I'm again trying to remain apolitical here, it's brought in things where, again, grants that have certain terms in them are instantly put forward for disapproval or stop funding. And some of the words that have been used for this are listed right here, and I can give you the numbers on them. And again, I'm not asking you today to say whether or not these are fair or not. I'm just letting you know that this is what's been happening. And then it's not only on the grants themselves, there's been a major impact in terms of NIH staffing. This, remember I said it was 9 months to get your initial score, and then 18 to 20 months probably before you would get funding. With staff cutting, it's adding even more to that time. It's harder now to get answers to questions from NIH because they've had decrease in numbers. And then again, even if in the past, investigators like myself, we would call or have conversations with NIH staff and say, what about this idea, or what do you think about that? They're actually afraid to give answers because if I put in a document that they advise this, or, it becomes heightened sensitivity. So it's created a very challenging environment. And again, I know the print might be small here, and it's too much detail to go through, but this has been quite dramatic because within the first month of the year, there were about 780 grants that were terminated with just short of $2 billion in funding. And then by the summer, about 2,100 grants were canceled with about $10 billion in funding. And then we entered, and I'm not going to go through all these because I will give examples later, this back and forth. Administration proposes this, a judge blocks it, the Supreme Court comes in and makes its decision. The administration does this. I mean, it's just been going back and forth, creating a lot of confusion on a system that is meaningful to all of our health. And I kind of debated putting in this slide, but it sends a message in a way. I don't know if anybody has heard of this Darwin Award that's been put out there, where people make a very poor choice, and for whatever reason, they either suffer from it or succumb to it and die. And there was one investigator at Harvard that it's down at the bottom, they made this database of all of the grants that were cut and then the possible reason why. And after doing this, he and publishing it or making it available on the web, his own grant funding was cut. So that was kind of like I feel sorry for this individual. I truly do. But it was in a way he created a situation where by trying to put forward information, he ended up losing his funding. So like I said, there's been a lot of back and forth here. Universities and societies have been, from the American Medical Association, Science, American Association of Science have put up calls for concern, a lot of lawsuits, congressional lawmakers. Congress has been working around this, having numerous hearings about how did politics enter into the NIH and science funding decisions. So there's been a lot of institutional responses. And for people like me and the tens of thousands of people that submit grants per year to NIH, and then all of the people that runs into the hundreds of thousands that are dependent on NIH funding, it's created this situation. Please stop and let me off this ride, because you go from, proposals of massive budget cuts to these are targeting certain institutions. Why are you doing this? And then states going at it and joining lawsuits to, like I said, judges halting. Here's an example of one of the congressional hearings where they said, based on these funding cuts, if you have cancer or loved ones with it, cancer grants, if the proposal had gone through, only 4% of cancer grants, it's only 9% now, but it would end up where only 1 in 25 cancer-related grants would be funded by the National Cancer Institute, 1 in 25. This was in late June. And then again, the Supreme Court comes in and then justifies. It's just this whipsaw that occurs on a daily or monthly thing. And then even in August, this one. And I could have gone on and on and on this, but I think I'm giving the point here. There's been, this year, it's just been this whipsaw that's tearing away at the seam of researchers trying to do their job and fulfill their passion to bring medical advances to all of you. Now, one of the surprises of this, and this is why I say it's not political at its core, there were a lot of people that said that it might be all related to outcomes of state elections. Were you in a blue state or a red state? And the answer is no, this is independent of this. It's more topic dependent. And what you can see here is that states that went in one way in the election can have just as much funding cuts as a state that went in the opposite direction of the current administration. This is more topic driven. And we in Florida were not the largest state to be impacted by this. We were clearly one of the largest. So this will impact, again, us here locally. Now, one more area of impact that you might be hearing more about, and it did make national news, is this area of what's called indirect research costs. And what are these? So indirect costs, which are called, go by the acronym ICDs, when you get a grant, let's say for $100,000, each institution will tag on a fee that's called indirect costs, and it's usually 50 to 60% of the grant. So a $100,000 grant will suddenly become a $150,000 award. And all institutions in the United States charge these indirect costs, and they're from a low of 30% to a high of near 70%. UF is right in the middle of this. Our indirect cost rate down the street is about 53%. Harvard and Yale are quite a bit higher. And there are areas that are excluded from indirect costs, but let's just use those. Now, at the same time, whereas the federal government does pay higher rates, foundations that may be disease specific, like in mine, it's called Breakthrough Diabetes or the American Diabetes Association. There's others like the American Cancer Society, the Arthritis Foundation, all of those. They usually charge from 0 to 30%, or excuse me, they award 0 to 30%, averaging around 10 to 15%. So it's much less. But why would there be concerns about indirect cost rates? The reason is is that like and I was trying to get this validated. And so if you fact check me later, this is maybe the one point I'll make today that I still need to confirm. But at the University of Florida, about 40% of its operating funds may come from grants at the College of Medicine, but all the benefit, meaning the School of Music, the arts program, the philosophy program, English department, campus as a whole, they in part live legally, and again, I want to say legally, off NIH indirect costs, because NIH does allow you to use these funds for debt reduction on buildings, campus facilities, et cetera. So this, if your background in history may be in English and say, well, what, I get it, Mark, on the healthcare things. Well, you do care because the University of Florida and other institutions across the country, IDC rates subsidize a lot of the facility operations across the university. And I give this effort here in that an example. Let's say this was a hospital building or a research laboratory in a clinical setting. NIH typically pays for these direct costs, which pays for salaries of investigator in the lower left-hand side, supplies, travel, lab equipment. But the rest of the enterprise, from security, building maintenance, safety things that need to be done. Ken ran for years a lot of these issues around safety for the lab investigators and the investigators themselves and patients, waste, data management, the utilities for buildings, water bills, AC, for example, the journals that we read, storage, and then all the regulatory issues. Whenever we're doing research, would be it in animals or humans, we have to have approval. And there's teams to do this, state laws. None of this is publicly funded except for indirect costs. So again, the enterprise cares about these. And again, there's a call to cut that came down from Washington to cut funding from, like what I said, at the University of Florida, we run at 53%. The call is to take it down to 15%, 1.5. So this is creating huge panic across institutions because everything on the right, who's going to pay for it? It could be the end of and it's not just at medical schools, it's the whole campus of any university will be impacted if this goes through. Now, let me close with two areas, because these are topics that can ask me to emphasize. And one of them is like, what if with all of this chaos, what impact is this going to have on the next generation of investigators? It was topical, and I shared this article with Ken about a week and a half ago. The New York Times ran on a weekend this large story about this investigator that's been studying cancer up at Harvard, and she has what she believes is on the cusp of some major advances in terms of cancer research, and yet she's facing budget uncertainties moving forward, careers in a critical situation. And this article, which is quite long, goes a long way to saying, hey, there's long-term consequences for the medical enterprises if you see this erosion of scientific talent, if you see a collapse of the system, you see delays in medical breakthroughs like I presented, and once they're gone, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to rebuild moving forward. And I just give an example here for one of the local example that I can speak forward to is Todd Brusco, who was an undergraduate student of mine, a volunteer actually in my lab in the early 2000s that eventually applied for a graduate school. And his research was funded by NIH, got his PhD working with me in 2006. He went out to San Francisco and was a postdoctoral fellow there with NIH funding, came back here in 2010 and has moved through the ranks from assistant to associate to now full professor, all with NIH support. And then I was the founder of what's a big NIH program grant 25 years ago. And I was able to, and I was sharing with Pushpa, I'm in the process of retirement. So I was able to transfer leadership of this award after 25 years to Todd. And the other thing is as of November last year, I retired as director of UF diabetes programs, and he's now the leader there. And he does research on the cutting edge. So, but the key thing that made this successful for Todd was having NIH support. But again, you have to be very persistent in order to achieve here success. And one of the reasons is it's taking longer and longer to even get NIH funding. Back when I started, the average age of your first grant, if you were a PhD, might have been around 35 years of age. And then now it's creeped up closer to 45. And if you're a physician and you already go through training, it's gone from about 38 years of age, time to get your first grant, to now about 45 years of age. So it's really hard to even, it takes long periods of time. I'm just going to speed up here and say on the top shows that if you look on the lower, the darker blue bar, that's the amount of money that NIH has been given every year by the Congress and the president. So it's been slowly rising. But if you actually equate it to the cost of living and then inflation, it's been pretty flat for decades. So they put more and more money goes in, but it's not like you're actually raising anything. And the success rate for obtaining grants shown in the bottom, it's a complex graph, it's been declining. So these are not, it's harder than ever to get obtaining grants. In the last few slides, again, we need this system to change, because if you're an undergraduate and now you're making a decision, do I want to go and obtain a doctoral degree in something, and let's say in medicine that would be tied to NIH, there's a lot of challenges. One is you probably are signing up for anywhere from 8 to 10 years of additional training beyond obtaining your bachelor's degree. There's a financial obligation, meaning if others in your undergraduate class go off into career, they're going to start earning a salary right away, if you're in a doctoral program, it'll be a modest salary. Job market uncertainty. When you have decreased grants, it creates uncertainty in terms of whether or not you could get funding. It's not a job with ease in terms of mental health and burnout risk. And then, like many careers, there's thoughts about in the future, what will be the role of PhDs when you have artificial intelligence and things tied to industry. So we have a very unclear situation for PhD graduates, and there's very similar situations for MD graduates. If you're a medical student and graduate, do I want to go into clinical medicine without research, where it's a clear path, or do I want to try research, which is less clear path? I've been talking all this time about the funding challenges, workload and time constraints. You already have an undue amount of time given to your clinical practice. Do you want to add on top of that research? You'll be slower to career progression. And then there's all of this administrative burden that's associated with clinical research. So we have actually now more than ever unfavorable climates in medicine in order to pursue a career here. So just ending with about 3 more slides. One, what do we do in this situation? So my message to universities is you have to be prepared for this. You have to be prepared for trying to fund research in ways maybe beyond NIH, and you have to design your system to be prepared to answer these challenges when, say, don't fund this research and then fund that. And you need to, again, try and engage in science, policy, and advocacy, perhaps now more than ever. And then what can you do to help? And I keep, if you hear nothing else in this call or this lecture, this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing. And again, Congress has historically been a friend of research and NIH. This is a thing that's for all of us. So if ever you have a chance to participate in advocacy campaigns, or if you have a legislator in here, or ever a way to engage thing, or sign something, these are your opportunities to let Congress know that you favor, the impact of research moving forward. So just in closing, it's hard times given the current environment to obtain grants, and the future doesn't look very bright. And we have to prepare for that. We have to be smart and wise at both an institutional level as well as individuals. If you're accepting of that situation where the world's greatest biomedical research will be performed elsewhere, China is poised to take over, that's, if we continue down the path, we're going to just see an acceleration in that. And this, despite that history of all of the advances that we all benefit from. And we need to, again, try and encourage our legislators to work together as they have in the past to try and avoid this situation from getting worse. And with that, 41 minutes in and 35 talk, I want to thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As a former arts administrator and public broadcasting administrator, I share your pain. We're seeing a similar activity against the arts and public broadcasting. I sure wish I knew what the answer was, but it's going to be really tough here. So thank you for that, though.
Right. Yes, these proposed changes, thank you for what you've done. And again, it's not been selective to medicine. It's communications, it's all the above. So I agree with that. And thank you for raising that point. Good.
Thank you for your presentation. You gave a very persuasive presentation of what we should do, what the need for what we do. But have you spoken anywhere else beside here at Okamic?
Oh, I mean, the question is, have I?
So I'll get to the point. Have you been to the Florida Farm Bureau? Have you been to the Lions Club? Have you spoken up in Bradford County or Gilchrist County? And if not you, is there anybody in the academic science community affected by what's happening, going out to Gilchrist, to Trenton, to I forget the Lake City, and talking to organizations up there? That's my question.
That's a great question. And the answer is partial yes. I've spoken to the Lions Club, but not about this topic, about diabetes, for example. But in this, I want to commend Ken and whoever else was involved in it for inviting me to give the talk on this. Like I said, I put this entire lecture together anew over the last 2 weeks. I spent 20 to 25 hours doing it because I wanted to put facts associated with it. I shared this talk with about 20 colleagues over the weekend. In total, I asked 5 to give comments because I believe, like you, it's a message that needs to get out. Few places are asking for talks like this. Why? I'm not sure. One might be either people are unaware or people in my position might be fearful of giving a talk like this. It probably wouldn't be super popular, but it's the truth. And maybe, again, in part, the onus is on people like me that are at the end of their careers to really speak out about this. Yeah, because we know that younger people are going to suffer. Yeah, that's a great point. We need more on this. Now, and again, and I know my colleagues, we speak to our legislators in the governor's office, and our Congresswoman, Kat, about this. But thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You've put together a great talk. As a former researcher and a former NIH reviewer for 20 years, I really appreciate all this, putting it all together. What is the specific effect at UF of all these grant cuts? Do you have any data on that? The overhead cuts and indirect cost, as well as the direct funding, and how is it affecting our students? Do you have any data on that, or is it available?
So thank you for that question. So what impact have we seen so far? So UF has had grants cancel. I know for myself, I had 2 NIH grants that had collaborators. I'm going to give myself an example. I had collaborators in Switzerland and in Germany that they were the only labs in the world that could do what I was asking of, and that were part of a funded grant. Back in July, I had to write them both and say, even though our grant continues, I can't send you any more dollars. I have a notice from the federal government that I can't supply you them. So those monies are gone. And again, that was in Switzerland and in Germany. You know, they make great cars and great watches. Yeah, I don't think there's politics associated with it, but they got cut off. And I know of other investigators that had the same thing, had to cancel grants. I have for 8 years, I've ran a grant on training people. I showed in this slide all the advances that have occurred in diabetes related to technology. Well, if you're wearing, it is not just diabetes, if you're wearing a pacemaker, there's so many biomedical devices that relate to a disease and biomedical engineering. I have a training program from NIH that was designed to recruit people with disabilities, as well as people without disabilities and minority investigators. That was canceled. And I had to go, I was given a reprieve where I could recruit people without disabilities and recruit people where they could be a minority, but that's not to be in the consideration. I had to spend about a half a day going through my website, going through all my documents, and erase any term erase any term that related to a race or disability that they have, either in mobility, they had a disease. And again, it's been like this way throughout the system. So the changes are occurring. They've affected me. But the big one that we're waiting on is what's going to happen with this indirect cost rate. If it goes down from 53% to 15%, the impact to the University of Florida is going to be catastrophic. And again, it's not just the College of Medicine or medical healthcare, it's the whole campus, which has been subsidized through NIH legally. Again, there's no duplicity here. So we're waiting on this.
Thank you for going to all the effort to present this. Really excellent. I have a question that you may not want to or can't answer that I've been asking myself for months. If it's not politically related and if it's not based on who vote for whom, why? Why would all this be happening when the implications are unbelievably bad?
Yeah. So if I had to give one word answer, it would be, I'd say it's overreach. And there's that old phrase about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I tend to think that this what it is. And again, for the 5th time, I'm not getting into politics here, but I'll use the Doge example. If you're funding people, or if a check is going out to fund people that are 350 years old and 275 years old and whatnot, and there's money's going out the door and it's related to a challenge, there's inefficiencies that need to be corrected, right? And I'm sure that's what's happening with grants. Is it a perfect system? Like I said in my slide, no, it's not. Does it need readjustments? Yes. But the question is how much, for doing this amount of good, do you have to tear up this amount? It'd be like if you needed an amputation, you need an amputated toe, but you say, well, if it's in the toe, maybe it's going to hit above the knee. So you take off a whole leg. Sorry for that graphic example, but in a way, I would say that that's what is kind of being done here, rather than focusing on the bit that needs to be addressed. We've taken out the whole thing. And getting to your point, there's also a bit of, dumbification that's going on in terms of not getting, it's to both the points and questions before you, not putting in fairness, information on truth about what's happening. Everything's so polarized. It's either real left, real right, and the truth is in the middle. And yet most people are being told one thing or another. Either it's all waste and inefficient, or it's a perfect system. And the truth is in the middle. And that's the kind of information that needs to get out.
I've got a question, actually two. What percentage of the federal government or budget would you say that these grants and all the money's going to the universities and to the labs make up? Is it 1%, 2%, 0.5% of the federal budget? That's one question. And is it possible that some corporations can pick up some of this slack and make up for it?
Yeah.
These profit-making corporations, these big drug companies.
So
Thank you.
the answer is the NIH budget is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the federal budget. It's $38 billion, 38 billion with a B. So it's very, very small percentage of the trillions of dollars that go in every year. And again, compared to, and it's part of the discretionary budget. So, which is a small part relative to, military and Social Security and healthcare. I mean, it's a blip on the budgetary scene, but again, in terms of impact, it's I would say, and the data argues for it, it's major. Now, in terms of industry taking on, that's actually usually, yes, they do. That's usually an end product. Meaning the NIH and the research academic missions and then small companies take the bride to the altar, if you would, but it's industry that has traditionally taken things, discoveries in medicine to federal approval, like FDA approval. They'll do the trials, clinical trials necessary, often in association with NIH, in order to get something improved. And will they continue to do that? Yes. But the challenge here is that, and again, I'm sorry for all the analogies. Imagine if you had a NFL or Major League Baseball. If there were no farm system or there are no college programs that made, undergraduate collegiate athletes or a Major League Baseball farm system, if the main professional players had to make decisions without those under things, it's a challenge. And so the thoughts are they'll be real discouraged or slow advances because there's no minor leagues essentially, and not that academia is minor league, but all of you're gutting the system that's worked so efficiently so far.
I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very well thought out and delivered. My question is around the area of the impact on the general university. I don't need to be sold on the value of research, and I think most people aren't. But we have grown up with the adages that words, they can mean anything you want them to mean. And statistics, we can find numbers to back whatever you want to back. So the current trend out there is college and universities really aren't worthwhile anymore. They certainly aren't as worthwhile in terms of education for students and their livelihoods afterwards, because we have the impact of AI. And AI, the big jobs are going to be garbage removal, plumbing, and et cetera. So why do we need college educations at the price of $100,000 to fund those kinds of jobs? And so the question really is, what studies are being used to drive the decisions that are being made by our lawmakers, the fake news, the whatever there is, because there's backing for all of this action that's taking place today.
Yeah. Well, you really do want me to get in trouble, don't you? So giving congressional testimony in the past in Washington and in the like, and you can see it on C-SPAN or the independent news networks. there are very smart people in Washington, and then there are those that largely rely on either media reports or daily thought sheets and talking points that come from staffers. I know that with efforts that I've been involved in terms of increasing research funding like this and others, it's often not the person in Congress or the Senate, the House of Representatives or Senate that makes the decision. They're the mouthpiece, but it's the staffers that are, a large in number that are actually the ones that'll target in. And it's scary, the level of knowledge that some of the people that do vote in Congress have on these areas. And most of it is shallow and not without depth. You mentioned about AI, there's another area that's scary. I don't know anybody can predict what's going to happen over the next 10 years there. But if you were a bookkeeper or a librarian or some sort of person working with numbers or planning, I'd be scared because it's going to change. And then one last point is, again, I'll give an example of where lack of knowledge kills, and that's in the area of immunizations. And again, where you fall in this, it's your choice. I know in the last 2.5 weeks, I had my flu shot, I had my COVID shot, I had pneumococcal vaccine and RSV vaccine. Last year, I had the zoster virus. So I'm actually a vaccination supporter because I know, and Ken's more expert on this, vaccines have saved so many lives. And the education on the topic's poor. And if we have a school system where this next generation of kids like my grandkids don't have vaccines, it's scary to think of how that future is going to be like. It will go back 75 years or more in terms of healthcare. I don't know, Ken, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Well, happy to talk after. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Another question, just a factoid. The NIH budget is 0.7% of the federal budget. Pocket change.
Raising that with specificity. Yeah, it's just tiny. But yet, if I go back to that slide on all the healthcare, I take 5 medications every day for phlebitis, my heart, and other things. So my cholesterol. So I'm thankful for progress that NIH has made. We maybe you're in a situation like me where you wake up in the morning, you look at that pill container. Well, you can thank research and NIH for that. And for new progress in the future, we need to consider that for ourselves and our kids and our grandkids. This is not, you may debate how the message is getting out, but this is important for everybody.
And these medications do work. Let me tell you, in the old days when I first started practicing medicine, we were so arrogant. If a patient came in on 5 or 10 pills, we just discontinued them and started from scratch. And half the time the patients would get worse because we weren't treating with the medication they needed, and their outpatient physicians knew. And don't get me started on vaccines because the chamber players, I think it is, won't be able to get a word in edgewise. But anyway, I want to say thank you, Mark.
Oh, thank you.
It's just been wonderful to have you put a talk together like this and, really tell us what the situation is. I think everybody appreciates it. I certainly do. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.